All right, students, so I want to pick up where I left off yesterday about the events leading up to the War of 1812. If you remember, there was an embargo act put on every import and export from foreign countries. And I told you, which was true, it hurt the Americans worse than it hurt the British. Um, and meanwhile, Britain bought whatever they needed elsewhere, mostly. They got it along pretty much okay. I mean, they would probably prefer to trade with the United States, but they couldn't, and so they got along without us. So Congress repealed the Embargo Act after Jefferson was out of office, and replaced it with a ban only on France and Britain, which was still very unpopular because they're, probably the most important people to us as far as Europe was concerned. But eventually the thing was repealed, like I told you. So now the election of 1808 comes up. And following Washington's example, Jefferson made it clear he wasn't going to run for office again. Now, he could have, because there's no term limits back in those days. But people were pretty upset with him over the Embargo Act, and I'm not 100% sure he would have been reelected because of that. The Democratic Republicans, Jefferson's party, nominated Madison, who was his Secretary of State, if you remember, to be their new nominee for president. And that was a natural fit. And you're going to see this as a pattern. In fact, even in modern day, it's a pattern. Quite often, someone in the president's cabinet will then be nominated to be that party's next presidential candidate. The Federalists nominated Charles Pinckney, not a name that you need to know because he was not elected. The Federalists are hoping that because people are upset over this Embargo Act, that Pinckney is going to get the push he needs to be elected into office. But it didn't happen because people still are pretty happy with the Democratic Republicans, with their overall handling of things in general. And they know Madison. And after all, Madison's pretty important. One of the founders. We know he's responsible for quite a bit of things. The Virginia Plan, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. So, yeah, he's pretty important and got elected pretty easily. But he faces his own issues. Congress passes a new trade law, and Napoleon takes advantage of this. He promises to end restrictions on U.S. ships, but actions speak louder than words. And the French continue to seize U.S. ships, and so do the British, honestly. So nothing really changes. I mean, Madison is the new president, and he's hoping, that he can make a difference and that the Congress is repealing these restrictions and things will be better. But really, it doesn't make a difference. The raiding on the U.S. ships continues on. And while Madison is angry at the French, he really blames the British for most of the problems. He believes that they're the heart of the issue because the attacks were more frequent from the British than they were from the French. And he's got problems in his own country here at home. It's not a question of just dealing with France and Britain. He's got Native American problems. He's getting bad news from the new state of Ohio. People have been flooding into those areas, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, all those areas west of the Appalachians. And we're supposed to not be having any more problems with Native Americans. However, that's not what's going on. The British are supposed to be gone from those areas, and that's not what's happening. Tecumseh was a powerful Shawnee chief. We have aircraft carriers named after him at one point or another because while he was a Native American chief and not on our side, people respected him as a leader and a warrior and a fighter. In fact, later on, one of our generals, his middle name was Tecumseh. We'll talk about him later. So he sees what's been successful for the United States. He sees that this model, just like the Iroquois had, he sees this model of coming together to build a confederation of people makes you stronger. And so he wants to go around to the other Native American tribes and try to build this consensus and confederation of people to help maybe not completely drive the white people out, but at least put a stop to some of their settling and some of their taking away of land. It's a lost cause, but he's giving it his best shot. And he's looking to the British to get some help because, of course, the British are natural enemies of the new Americans that are coming across the Appalachians to settle there. Now, the British don't belong there, but that doesn't change the fact that they're enemies. Tecumseh's brother was blind in one eye and known as the prophet. He was said to be able to, have this wonderful ability to tell the future and see into your heart and that kind of thing. And the prophet is urging Native Americans to return to their roots, to their ancient customs, to do away with these ideas of trying to become like white people and not try to fit in. Don't try to fit in. Go back to what you know that you've always known. And forget these advanced ways. Forget this advanced culture. Go back to what we always were. And he settles a place called Prophetstown. You see it on the map over there. It's in Illinois, far north in Illinois, to start the process of this going back to the Native American roots. Tecumseh meets with the governor of Indiana, William Henry Harrison, and his name is going to become important, Harrison himself is becoming worried about the consolidation of power that's happening with the Shawnee, because he's like, ooh, this probably isn't a good thing. So he sent Tecumseh a request for a meeting in person. Like, Tecumseh is pretty highly educated. He can speak English. He can understand things. And he explains to Tecumseh, and he says, there's really no way you're going to stop it. You have no idea how many white people there are. And we're going to keep coming across the mountains, and we're going to keep settling in these areas. Your best bet is to try to get along with us, but not to try to drive us out. And Tecumseh doesn't give one whit about this. He's like, well, this is how it is. We're not going to be friends. We're just not. But in the meantime, while Tecumseh is gone, he leaves to go, riding on his horse around to different Native American tribes and villages to try to round up support. And while he's gone, the Battle of Tippecanoe takes place. And at this battle, Harrison and some of his troops attack Prophetstown, and they wipe out the people. It's decimated. In just 2 hours of battle, the prophet's forces fled, because the prophet is not a warrior. He's a prophet, and he doesn't have a lot of warriors there. That's what Tecumseh's job had been, is to go out and round people up to be warriors. They just have a town there, not a bunch of soldiers and warriors. It's a decisive U.S. victory. But afterwards, what it does is drive the Native Americans in that area, Tecumseh included, into the open arms of the British, who are going to supply him with all sorts of intelligence about where the Americans are, and guns and supplies. Of course, this is not a good thing. Madison is facing increasing calls for war. And remember, he's the first one that was calling for war when Jefferson was president, and Jefferson was dragging his heels on that. And the people, especially making these calls for war, were Henry Clay of Kentucky. Please remember his name. You've got to remember both these names. Henry Clay from Kentucky and John Calhoun from South Carolina. Both these people are very influential in the years ahead of this, coming after this, during this time and after this. The reason they're influential, they're called war hawks. And they lead a group of congressmen from the western areas and some of the southern states. And they're calling for war because they're saying, hello, there are British people in forts over here where they were supposed to be gone for decades now, and they are encouraging the Native Americans to raid on our settlements, terrorize our people. They were paying the Native Americans to scalp the white people that were settling there. So it was the same thing that had been going on during the Revolution in the western areas. So it was a bad thing. And Clay and Calhoun are trying desperately to get the attention of James Madison, the president, and the rest of Congress in Washington, D.C., and make them aware that this horrible thing is going on in their own country. All right, so these war hawks support increases in military spending, and they think the war is going to give them more land. In fact, they're really a little bit delusional. In reality, the Native American problem was very severe in Western lands, okay? And this Clay, though, is overreaching. He wants to use this excuse to invade Canada, because his excuse is, well, the British are down here where they don't belong, so we should invade Canada to just put them down completely. And the Southern Warhawks want to invade Spanish Florida. So now this would give us a war fighting on two fronts, and at sea as well, which would be patently ridiculous. I mean, you can understand their upsetness and demand for some action about getting the British out of forts and wanting to make Madison realize that there's a problem. But then to push for war against Canada and then against Spain and Florida was completely overreaching on their part. All right. But by the spring of 1812, Madison knows that he can't avoid it any longer because people are being impressed at sea. People are writing him left and right, mothers, daughters, wives. We were sending our people off to sea to just ship things around the world, and they're gone, and they're not coming back. And they're not coming back because the British are impressing them. And so on June 1st, Madison asked Congress for the declaration of war. And, of course, Congress is going to give it to him. Now, unbeknownst to the Americans, the British had already decided to stop with the idea of searching and impressing, but it was too late for that. And there's other things going on with that besides. Like I said, they are in forts in the Western lands where they don't belong, and they have been for decades. And they are stirring up trouble against the settlers there. It has to stop. And so these are the things that contribute to the beginning of the War of 1812. It wasn't just about one tiny little thing. It was about many things.